भारत का संविधान इतने गहन मंथन के बाद बना है कि उसे जीवंत दस्तावेज कहा जाता है। इसी संविधान की मूल प्रति के तीसरे अध्याय में भारत के नागरिकों के मूलभूत अधिकारों का वर्णन किया गया है।
That was Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressing the country in an episode of his monthly radio program, Mann Ki Baat, in January 2024, soon after he inaugurated the Ram Mandir at Ayodhya.
और ये बहुत दिलचस्प है कि तीसरे अध्याय के प्रारंभ में हमारे संविधान निर्माताओं ने भगवान राम, माता सीता और लक्ष्मण जी के चित्रों को स्थान दिया था। प्रभु राम का शासन हमारे संविधान निर्माताओं के लिए भी प्रेरणा का स्रोत था और इसलिए
There's really no evidence that the constitution makers were inspired by Ram Rajya, as he says. But this part is true. The page on the fundamental rights chapter does depict Ram, Sita and Lakshman returning to Ayodhya after exile. And that's not the only illustration. Here's former minister and senior BJP leader Ravi Shankar Prasad talking about some of the others in a recent lecture.
The first is on the citizenship and the sketches, the Vedic life in India. Above the citizenship, the first is the Vedic life in India. And then came the fundamental right chapter. And what is the sketch? Lord Ram returning to Ayodhya from Sri Lanka with Sita and Lakshman. That is the second one. Then you have the director principle of state policy. And the sketch is Lord Krishna, Upadesh about Gita in Mahabharata. On finance, property, contract and suites is the image of Lord Nataraja. Okay.
There are also drawings of Akbar, Tipu Sultan, the Rani of Jhansi, Buddha and Mahavira in other chapters. The constitution has deep symbolic value as a visual artifact. When we think of the constitution today, we often think of B.R. Ambedkar in a blue suit and round glasses holding the book in his hand. Or we imagine a thick tome with 3 Ashokan lions on it. We rarely think of the images inside that book, but there are, in fact, 22 such illustrations. This is the story of how they came to be in the Constitution, and of Nandalal Bose, the man who led the project of illustrating it. Bose was one of the pioneers of Indian modernism in art, and the chosen artist of both Rabindranath Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi. He lived and worked through a period of great national ferment, and his body of work is closely tied with the freedom struggle and independence. In this episode, we'll try to understand what the nation's founders hoped to achieve by juxtaposing complex legal articles with episodes from our history and epics. We'll try to unpack the threads connecting art to nation building, and we'll examine how visual culture can reflect a nation's aspirations. This is Season 3 of Friend of the Court, a podcast that explores our legal and constitutional history. And I'm your host, Raghu Karnad. Bengal, at the start of the 20th century, was a hotbed of cultural and political activity. Led by people like Rabindranath Tagore and the scientist Jagdish Chandra Bose, a new class of Bengali intelligentsia was pushing the boundaries of science, literature, and art. Rabindranath's nephew, Abanindranath, a well-established painter, was fed up with how Indian artists were relying on Western artistic idioms and techniques. He wanted to push modern art in a new direction, one that drew more on Indian traditions and away from stiff oil paintings and realist depictions of human figures. Until now, artists like Raja Ravi Verma had incorporated significant elements of Western art into their practice. For instance, Verma depicted Hindu mythological characters or royal and upper-class figures in oil paintings in the style of Western portraiture. Rabindranath wanted to draw more on local idioms such as folk traditions, Mughal and Rajput miniatures, as well as other non-Western cultures. It was a pioneering new approach, and it blended eclectic influences and helped create what we know today as the Bengal School of Art.
The inspiration for the Bengal school came from miniatures. Rabindranath was very interested in Mughal painting. I mean, he was fascinated by that.
This is Shiva Kumar. He's a retired teacher, curator, and critic, and is considered the authority on Nandalal Bose, the man at the heart of this episode.
Well, I teach art history at Shantiniketan. I have been teaching here for over 40 years. Now I'm just retired, so I have been teaching art history at Shantiniketan. And I have been living here since 1974, so a resident of this place.
Kumar is an expert on early Indian modernism, especially the Shantiniketan artists. Speaking to us from the university town in a simple white shirt, white beard, and spectacles, in a room surrounded by books, Kumar wears his erudition lightly.
Now, theoretically, of course, they were saying they're reviving Indian painting, but it included his experience of European watercolors, his exposure to Japanese painting. So basically, the style of Rabindranath is a confluence of all these: European watercolor painting, Mughal miniatures, and his exposure to Japanese painting. All this come together, and it is this style that his students take and take it forward.
Nandalal Bose was one of those students who readily took to Rabindranath's vision. Bose was born in 1882 in the Bengal Presidency. He was artistic from a young age, but his parents put him through a more traditional education.
He was born into a Bengali family, but his father was working at the court of Darbhanga. So he spent a lot of his early life in what is now Bihar. There's a place called Kharagpur, and that is where he spent a lot of his early life. Then came to Calcutta. He was not very keen in pursuing his formal education, but very much interested in art. So at that point, he leaves that and goes into art training, works under Rabindranath, then becomes a part of that whole movement, which we call Bengal School.
Bose first trained under Rabindranath Tagore at the Government College of Art in Calcutta. He was deeply influenced by the murals in the Ajanta caves, which he visited as a young assistant on an early sketching expedition in 1909, and by the temple art of South India, which he saw on another study tour. The work of Japanese and Chinese artists also left an impression on him, particularly their monochromatic aesthetic, ink drawings, woodwork, and lino cuts. From his early years, he drew from myths and epics. One of his most famous works from this period is called Sati, named after Shiva's consort. The painting shows a sari-clad Sati in prayer against an ombre grey-orange background. It carries all the hallmarks of Bose's work: her Chinese appearance, the use of earth tones, and the wash technique, which produces a semi-transparent layer of color. And as his association with Rabindranath continued through the 1910s,
he is noticed by Rabindranath and encouraged to come to Shantiniketan and be part of the art program that he started here. So he came up to Shantiniketan and...
Rabindranath Tagore had founded a university at Shantiniketan, then a small village about 150 kilometers west of Calcutta.
Rabindranath had been worrying about the education of his children and had decided to start an experimental educational institution in Shantiniketan. It was to be a school, but not like the schools that had been the nightmare of his own childhood. It was to be like the forest hermitages of classical India. But to bring it into being was not an easy task. For one thing, it cost money.
That's from a documentary about Rabindranath Tagore, made by another Bengali great, Satyajit Ray.
Rabindranath gave the school at Shantiniketan a new status and a new name. Yatra Vishwam Bhavati Ekaniram, where the world becomes a single nest. This was the motto of the Vishwa Bharati.
Rabindranath envisioned Vishwa Bharati as a new kind of global university which would draw on Eastern and Western ideas. By now, the Swadeshi movement, centered on self-rule and economic self-sufficiency, was in full swing. Artists like those of the Bengal school were finding a new visual idiom and identity to match this political spirit. Rabindranath also thought that artists should engage with their immediate environment and local communities.
Just he was drawn to the larger figures, the more energetic kind of drawing that he saw in Ajatan. So in a sense, Nandalal was actually tuned to respond to Rabindranath. Having again grown up in rural Bihar in his early life, he responded to Rabindranath's ideas in many ways. He was interested in doing larger works. He was interested in public art.
Rabindranath's own nephew, Abanindranath, was reluctant to leave Calcutta. Nandalal Bose was not. He arrived at the university's newly formed art school, Kala Bhavan.
And Nandalal Bose was the person who headed this institution when it was founded in 1919. And till 1951, he headed this institution. So that's his association with this place. So in a sense, it is his ideas that shaped this institution.
Inspired by Rabindranath, Bose began to focus on nature and community life. Bose also revived the Indian tradition of wall paintings and drew on folk art such as the Kalighat style, which used bright colors and thick lines. He continued experimenting with different materials and methods and developed a teaching program that encouraged students to do the same. He was also starting to grow more overtly political. In the early 1920s, the national movement was being revived by a lawyer who had returned from South Africa, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Bose was impressed by Gandhi and his philosophy of non-violent civil disobedience. Gandhi had even visited Shantiniketan a few times at Rabindranath Tagore's invitation.
And Nandalal, of course, started seeing the kind of activity that Gandhi was doing, and he became much more interested in that. So simultaneously, Rabindranath and Gandhi, they were very close friends, but they differed in their attitudes to nationalism, especially the agitational kind of nationalism that Gandhi was leading. He was not very comfortable with the idea of non-cooperation, and he thought, the idea of taking children out of school was not a very great idea. He was not interested in burning things as a part of agitation and so on. So they had their differences of opinion, but remained great friends till the end.
In letters and in public writings, Gandhi and Tagore engaged and challenged each other's views on the national movement. Tagore, who had a more internationalist outlook, differed from Gandhi's more cultural nationalist tendencies. Though he was skeptical of Gandhi's approach, Tagore didn't prevent his colleagues from participating in his struggle.
And Nandalal was one person who was close to both these, who kind of gave shape to the ideas of both these men in different ways. So he straddled between them very well and quite easily. It was not a very easy task, but he did that. So he was completely involved. So he became engaged in many things. And the first time, of course, politically, is when the Dandi March happens.
The Great March for Liberty began. Gandhi started on his 241-mile-long trek from the ashram to Dandi, a village on the sea coast, along with his chosen band of 78 ashram inmates, symbols of the national determination with a strong resolve and undaunted look.
In 1930, Gandhi led a march to protest the government's tax on salt. They marched for 24 days. This was the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. You might have seen an iconic black and white lino-cut image of Gandhi from this historic moment. He's in profile, barefoot, with muscled calves, his right foot forward, a stick in his right hand, his back slightly hunched. He's wearing his dhoti up to his knees and a cloth around his shoulders. That image was made by Nandalal Bose.
The print became very important because, in a sense, it became an image that is very easily reproducible, which can be transmitted, and it's very simple. Because Gandhi's act was also very simple. Just walking a few, 100 kilometers, picking up salt on the seashore. It's an extremely simple act in a way, and that's the most famous image that we see, Gandhi walking with a stick. Now, that brought, in a sense, Nandalal's artistic genius and Gandhian image together. And Gandhi might have also noticed this because this was an image which immediately got the attention. It was reproduced. It was in all kinds of ways. Nationalists used it.
Gandhi himself did not believe in art for its own sake. He was austere, more concerned with religion and philosophy than with cinema or literature. But Bose's work stirred his interest. The way he drew scenes from the lives of ordinary folk, peasants, craftsmen, laborers, people who toiled away without much representation in the public sphere, let alone in the sphere of high culture. Perhaps this is what appealed to Gandhi: art that acknowledged and embraced common people and their labors. In 1936, Gandhi asked Bose to organize an arts and crafts exhibition for the annual Congress session in Lucknow. The Congress met every year in a different location, where it took stock of the movement and planned its next moves. Bose's exhibition was the first of its kind to be held alongside the annual session. In his opening remarks, Gandhi praised Nandalal Bose, as Shiv Kumar recounted in this 2019 lecture.
But they are simply but exquisitely decorated walls done by Nandalal Bose, the eminent artist from Shantiniketan, and his co-workers, who have tried to represent the villagers' craft in simple artistic symbols. And when you go inside the art gallery, on which Nanda Babu has lavished his labors for weeks, you will feel, as I did, like spending 3 hours together. And then he goes on to say that this is going to be not an entertainment, but there is so much to learn in this exhibition, and this is going to be an educative one.
Gandhi had always idealized and upheld village life and the village economy as integral to the national project. By bringing village arts and crafts into an important political meeting, he was showcasing this philosophy in practice. After the Lucknow session, Bose's work regularly appeared at Congress sessions. In 1937, he went on to create art for the session in Faizpur, in present-day Uttar Pradesh, and their collaboration would reach its highest point in 1938 at the Haripura session.
51st session of the Congress met on the bank of the river Tapti at Haripura, in rural surroundings, under the stewardship of Subhas Chandra Bose, the youngest president, in February 1938.
This time, Gandhi's brief to Nandalal Bose was simple: build an exhibition around the Congress session, which captured an essence of India and its people. Nandalal Bose travelled to the small hamlet in Gujarat, observing rural scenes. He used local material and labour for the final exhibition. The 400-odd works eventually came to be known as the Haripura posters. Executed on handmade paper, with pigments created from stone and earth, they include a woman churning butter, another woman pounding rice, another bathing her child. Bose deployed pastel shades and earthy tones. The lines were thick and bold. The figures stood out against lighter backdrops. There's a photo of Gandhi and Bose together from Haripura in 1938. Bose, in a moustache and spectacles, wrapped up in a shawl, points to one of the paintings as Gandhi looks on attentively. Gandhi was effusive in his praise for Nanda Babu. He was deeply impressed by the artist's ability to grasp the brief and, in his words, give it a concrete shape. The works created a vision of rural harmony, a visible rejection of colonial urbanism, and affirmed the dignity of common people. Many of these are now part of the collection at the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi. By the 1940s, Bose was already an internationally renowned artist, but his association with Gandhi raised him to the status of a national icon. Now he was on the cusp of another historic commission.
Mr. President, sir, I beg to move. This Constituent Assembly declares its firm and solemn resolve to proclaim India as an independent, sovereign republic and to draw up for her future governance a constitution.
The work of drafting a constitution for a soon-to-be independent country began in December 1946. Nearly 300 elected representatives came together to debate and decide the values and vision for the new nation. By November 1949, their work was done, and the document would come into force 2 months later, on 26 January 1950. The Indian Constitution was unprecedented in many ways. It laid down a liberal government for a largely illiberal society. It gave all Indians equal privileges and rights. It was also the longest constitution ever written, and it was about to get one more distinction.
There are 2 copies of the original Constitution of India which lie in Parliament in helium-filled cases, an English and a Hindi one. They are highly revered and protected in a completely secure condition so that they can be protected and maintained.
This is Naman Ahuja.
Hi, I'm Naman Ahuja. I'm a professor of art history at JNU. I also edit one of India's oldest journals in art history, on art history and visual culture, which is called Marg. The Constitution of India is an exquisite document. It's a large folio which is hand-painted and it has got calligraphy by hand. The calligraphy was done by Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada, and the paintings were all masterminded by Nandalal Bose and his many students who worked with him on the project at Shantiniketan. I haven't opened the case with the original and flicked through the paintings of the original and studied those. That I haven't yet done. But I have worked with the original etchings and facsimiles that were produced of this. And so we used one of the first impressions of the Constitution to display in an exhibition called India and the World.
Ahuja co-curated this exhibition, featuring collections from the British Museum, the National Museum in Delhi, and the Chhatrapati Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya in Mumbai. It told the history of India through about 200 different objects, and the Constitution was one of them. The process of writing the Constitution and the debates that led to it have been well documented in academia, in popular culture and books, but there's very little record of how the Constitution came to be illustrated. Bose himself left no public writing on the subject, and neither did the students or family members who worked with him. His obituary in the Times of India didn't even mention his work on the Constitution.
What we know is that it was decided that the Constitution will be handwritten, and they were looking for people who would be considered for that. Then there were, probably, this is my guess, there were people who were interested in contributing decorative aspects to the chairperson of the Constituent Assembly, Rajendra Prasad. It is in his letters and correspondence that we see that they are thinking about Mahatma. I mean, narrow down on him, because they knew him from his work with Gandhi and Tagore and so on.
We asked Naman Ahuja if Bose was a surprise choice.
I think it was an understandable choice on the part of the powers that be to have selected him over the other contenders. A valid case could have been made to go down the road of being completely modern and taken somebody from the Progressive Artists group, or who went on to form the Progressive Artists group.
A young group of Bombay-based artists formed in 1947, including future greats F.N. Souza, S.H. Raza, and M.F. Hussain, who sought to move away from the Bengal school of art and its revivalist nationalism towards a more avant-garde style.
It could have been valid to have taken artists who were coming out of Delhi and Lahore, or coming out of Baroda and Bombay, or coming out of any other part of South Asia. Even within Bengal, there could have been other artists who could have been selected. But I think the choice of Nandalal, who had been a pedagogue for so many years, who had been closely allied with the thinking and working of both Tagore and Gandhi, and was Gandhi's preferred artist and chosen artist for so many projects. He had been involved in the nation building process and messaging, the importance of public messaging and how you shape public messaging through your visual language. The opportunities that he had already got in his career previously in shaping that, I think, lent him a certain credibility where his work would have been used. He was ready for the job, as it were.
Bose was not given a brief, according to Shiv Kumar. It appears that the drawing and the writing were completely separate projects, out of sync with one another. According to records of the Parliament Secretariat, Bose was approached to do the illustrations only as late as October 1949, that is, 3 years after debates had begun in the Constituent Assembly. In his letter to Bose, the President of the Assembly, Rajendra Prasad, emphasized that the effort would be treasured not just as a political and intellectual achievement, but also as an artistic one. Bose's work began in December 1949, or just a month before the Constitution was adopted. He selected a group from among his students and family members and directed who should do which panel.
We were all excited. Yes, I feel very happy and a little proud also that my grandfather chose me to do this great work. Jawaharlal Nehru gave the work to my grandfather for this constitution. And he gave this work to the students and teachers, certificate in Kalabhavan. I made 5 pages.
That was Bani Patel, one of Bose's granddaughters, and, at 21, the youngest member on the team. Neither Patel nor any of the artists is alive today. You just heard a clip of Patel from an AIR documentary. The Hindi and English calligraphy work was commissioned from 2 different people. The drawing and calligraphy went on simultaneously. As far as we know, neither Bose nor any of his collaborators attended any of the Constituent Assembly debates. All we know is that he was told to decorate the founding document of the Indian Republic. And as with his earlier assignments for Gandhi, he brought his own vision to it.
There was no imposition in what he should be doing. The program was his own. So he got a few of artists, number of them belonging to his own family, like his son and daughters, and also a few of his old students from Shanti. And then they worked as a team and did this work.
Nandalal Bose and his team beautified the founding document with a dazzling array of illustrations and designs. An intricate filigree pattern stretches over the cover page. In the middle is a pillar mounted with Asiatic lions in gold foil facing in 3 different directions. This design, which was done by Dinanath Bhargava, one of Nandalal Bose's students, was eventually adopted as the national emblem. In this clip from the AIR documentary, Bhargava's wife, Prabha, tells us more.
ये कलकत्ते जू में जाते थे 6 महीने तक वहाँ गए लगातार शांति निकेतन से कलकत्ता फॉर द स्टडी ऑफ लॉयन. तो इसमें क्या है कि एक नर है, एक मादा है और एक उनका बच्चा है. ये 3 लॉयन हैं और इनकी अलग अलग स्टडी की गई थी क्योंकि तीनों के जो बनाए हैं आकृति बनाई है वो थोड़ी अलग अलग है. और ये सारनाथ का जो आपका ये था स्टैचू था, इसकी कॉपी है ये. वैसे मतलब ये जो स्तंभ बनाए हैं ये सारनाथ का है, अशोक के टाइम का है. और ये क्योंकि तहस नहस हो गया था तो इसको इन्होंने नया रूप देके और ये बनाया है.
Inside, the pages are set in golden patterned borders. There are 22 illustrations, one for every chapter. The lines are bold, but the colors and shading are muted. Only a few images have rich colors. Bani Patel again.
The papers were specially made. They called it parchment paper, thick and beautiful. So on that we traced brushwork with black Chinese ink and gold leaf. We had to prepare the gold color from gold leaf.
The first illustration is the humped bull seal from Harappa, the Indus Valley settlement, with the undeciphered inscription above it. It appears at the top of the first page of the part describing the Indian Union and its provinces. The next chapter, which deals with citizenship, opens with an image of a Vedic Gurukul. The Directive Principles chapter contains a scene from the Mahabharata. Here, Krishna is having his famous talk with Arjuna, just before the start of the war. The men are dressed for battle, seated in a chariot drawn by 4 horses. A cross-legged Mahavira opens the chapter titled Part 6. One of the only images colored in blue and red, Mahavira is seen deep in penance, surrounded by foliage and an onlooking peacock. Portraits of Shivaji and Guru Gobind Singh appear in side-by-side panels in the chapter on elections. Both men are calm and regal, bearded and dressed in flowing attire, with weapons in their hands. Ahuja tells us more.
And then it also pays attention to Indian mythology and extols certain figures, or selects for inclusion, I should say, rather than extolling, selects for inclusion certain figures who are widely regarded as legitimizing forces within India. And so you will have paintings of Arjun bowing his head in front of Krishna. You will have Ram, Sita and Lakshman moving forward. You will have Akbar holding counsel as the great learned king. There is a powerful figure of the Rani of Jhansi. So there are these kinds of characters that are there, and you look at them and you realize this is indeed the selection of the cast of characters that were extremely important to give India national pride in the 1920s to the 1960s. These were the benchmarks for what was regarded as being Indian history, the great episodes of Indian history, the great characters of Indian history.
The records of the Parliament Secretariat suggest only very mundane exchanges between Nandalal Bose and the President's office. Discussions on borders and space, technical things like margins and measurements. Bose appears not to have communicated which figures he would be placing in the actual document.
Why did these episodes and these characters make the cut for inclusion? And what might there have been that did not make the cut? I find it quite curious, for instance, looking through all the paintings as to why there aren't more women in the paintings, in the illustrations. Why are there so many men in the paintings? And why are there not as many women in the paintings?
The document raises so many questions. Why open the Fundamental Rights chapter with an image of Ram? What does the chapter on the President and the Vice President have to do with the enlightenment of the Buddha? Why pair a scene from Akbar's court with the section on states and the Union? Here's one possible answer.
It's a chronological thing. It has nothing to do with the chapters. It is an independent aspect. To me, I feel that he was trying to inscribe our entire history into the Constitution, or at least serve as a backdrop to it. I mean, in a way, it allows us to see the Constitution as a culmination of a long history, rather than just a breakaway. That is probably what he had in mind. Because that was also the idea that as nationalists, these artists wanted to do. I mean, not to just completely break away from our past, but to build upon it. And build upon it without being insular to the rest of the world.
Shiva Kumar has taken a granular look at the few available notes from the entire exercise. These offer tantalizing clues on some of the roads not taken. For instance, A tentative plan to include images of national leaders such as Nehru and Patel was dropped. However, Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose are featured in 3 chapters. One note shows that portraits of Akbar and Shah Jahan with Mughal architecture was on the cards, but eventually only an image of Akbar and 3 men that Shiv Kumar just describes as his architects was used. An illustration called Scenes from Alexander's Invasion was crossed out. Images of mountains, desert, and ocean, which didn't feature in the original list, were added later.
So in a sense, bringing these natural elements at the end of the thing, the land, the mountains, the deserts, the sea, in a sense, is an acknowledgement or way of invoking Tagore, who is absent from his whole thing. If you remember, that is one of the central elements in many of his poetry.
The individual drawings may not tell us much, but together they tell a story.
What Nandalal does is that he doesn't want to be just disconnected. He wants it to be a new point in a long history. So he inscribes our past into the future that we were envisioning. This was something that, if you think about the nationalists in a way, they were all looking back to an India while they were all planning for a future India. Gandhi was doing it in a way. Tagore was doing that in a way. Even Nehru, in a sense, his discovery of India is looking back at the history of India while they're all planning the future of India, in a sense. So look at it, see what can be taken from that India and what can be, shaped in the form of a new India. So you can always, there'll be elements that you can salvage from your past, which will be useful.
Nandalal Bose was clearly determined to not just mine the past, but also bring in a broad range of styles. His idea of diversity was also stylistic diversity. Naman Ahuja explains.
The different styles include bits of Rajput painting traditions, sometimes very graphically rendered outlines of what would be in the sculptural traditions of India. Sometimes you see borders and patterns which are derived out of an inspiration of Mughal art. Then there is a lot of use of isolated motifs as decorative ornament, which have come out of Gupta period painting and workmanship that you see on the borders of temples, or you see surrounding on the ceilings of Ajanta, for instance. So you get line drawings that have come in. So you do see an inspiration that comes in from a diverse range of Indian art styles.
By January 17th, 1950, or a week before the Constitution would come into effect, only 100 pages had been calligraphed, and only 15 had completed border work. A note from the Constituent Assembly Secretary ruled that only half of the work would be completed by January 26th. There was also the pressing question of money. Before the project began, there was no formal agreement on how much the artists and calligraphers were to be paid. As of January 1950, it appears that only 700 rupees had been advanced to Bose for the materials. Bose eventually only asked for the cost of materials to be covered and honorariums to be paid to his team, on the basis of a rate card per page. It came to rupees 18,000 to rupees 20,000 in total. He emphasized that this work was done by the group out of patriotic zeal and artistic interest. The calligrapher, Prem Bihari Raizada, was to be paid separately, though according to some accounts, he never accepted any payment.
This is All India Radio. The news read by Roshan Menon. The President, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, received a beautifully finished handwritten copy of the Indian Constitution from Mr. Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada, a Rampur calligraphist, yesterday. Completed in 5 months, the 251-page calligraphed copy is written on 17 by 23-inch parchment sheets, which are supposed to last 1,000 years.
In late 1950, once all the decorative work was completed, 1,000 copies of the Constitution were printed. The total cost? Just under rupees 70,000. They had the signatures of every member of the assembly at the end, and on special request, the signature of Raizada and the name of his grandfather on the last page.
Of the members, a couple of signatures have overshot the area which was demarcated for them. And in the final constitution, you can see the borders are changed to accommodate that. So which means that the signatures took place first.
Naman Ahuja urges us to view the project of decorating the founding document against a wider backdrop. As India was emerging from colonial rule, it had to create for itself not just a new political future, but a new way of imagining itself visually. So far, colonial iconography had dominated government imagery, whether on currency notes or stamps, public portraits, or official seals.
What should be the symbol that will epitomize the democracy, the Republic of India? What would be the visual language? Because when you're ruled by a country like Britain, Britain had its crown and it had its Britannic lion and it had its currency notes and postage stamps with the head of their monarch that was used across and became the visual language of India, right? And of all their colonies.
He goes on to say that there were several options for symbols of monarchs or deities, even political parties. But
in 1947, with partition, it had become extremely important to try and find a visual language that was going to be inclusive and not divisive. And choosing motifs and symbols that were going to be located in one religion was not going to be acceptable to all. So there was a larger quest that was on finding a visual vocabulary for India that was going to replace the colonial vocabulary.
Bose was in his 60s when he finished the work on the Constitution. In 1951, he retired as the head of the department at Shantiniketan, though he continued to live and work there. He received the nation's second highest civilian honor, the Padma Vibhushan, in 1954. And in 1976, the central government recognized his work as a national art treasure under the Antiquities and Art Treasures Act of 1972. 9 artists in total have been given this recognition, including Bose's mentor Rabindranath Tagore, Raja Ravi Verma, and Amrita Shergill. When Bose died in April of 1966, at the age of 83, he left a massive body of work, as many as 7,000 paintings. These include paintings depicting scenes from the Mahabharata, Sati, Saraswati, and Shiva drinking poison, often considered among his finest pieces. Much of his work lies with the NGMA in Delhi. In 2008, museums in the US held perhaps the first major international Bose retrospective. That placed Bose against the wider national movement of the first half of the 20th century, and it underscored how modernism flourished outside the West. In 2013, many works from the private collection of his grandson, Supratik Bose, were placed on sale by the auction house Christie's. The collection included some of the Haripura posters and rough sketches of his lino cut of Gandhi. The total sale price went up to nearly $3 million. As with any work of art, whether literature or films or paintings, the artist's control over its interpretation is limited beyond a point. How does a work come to be framed long after the artist is dead? Bose may never have intended for certain meanings to be attributed to his works, and yet that was inevitable.
Illustrations of the Constitution of India have been brought up as a matter in court. One in the Court of Justice Harinath Tilhari, I think, who delivered a judgment that the illustrations contained in the Constitution must be seen as an expression of our secularism and the history of our culture, a history in which there is no negation of any community or any religious group. And I think that was as far back as 1993, 1992 or 93 when that particular judgment came.
Ahuja is referring to one of the cases related to the Ayodhya dispute. The judgment upheld the rights of Hindus to worship at the spot where they believed Ram was born. It said Indian secularism meant the state treated all religions equally and it would be unfair to Hindus to deprive them of this right. In addition, the judgment said that Ram could be regarded as a constitutional entity since he made an appearance in the constitution. But experts have warned against reading too much legal or jurisprudential meaning into these illustrations. Which brings us back to the image that the Prime Minister highlighted after inaugurating the Ram Mandir in January last year.
I don't think that, you can't take one image out of a sequence. As I said, maybe something that the present government would not like to see is Tipu right there. Somebody whom they hate is there. Nandalal puts all that. So to me, it is history. And of course, you're free to interpret it in any way you want. But if you take the whole of it together, then you see a different pattern. You see a chronology. We may not agree with that chronology today because history is constantly changing, but that is how people understood at that time.
From his early years, Bose subscribed to the cosmopolitan worldview of Tagore. Though he included Hindu images and figures in a secular and forward-looking document, he didn't intend for the project to convey Hindu supremacy.
Nandalal probably was a believing Hindu, but he was responsive, and there were students from every part of India, from every religion, who worked with him, and some of his assistants, close people, were not Hindus. They were working with a broader perspective, and that, I think, was the perspective of most nationalists. Irrespective of their personal beliefs or non-beliefs.
In this season, we've looked at India's constitutional history through a new prism, through diverse figures whose own worldviews helped shape the national project and our constitutional culture. Nandalal Bose has a unique legacy in this regard. His artistic philosophy, which carried the deep imprint of Tagore, and his works became a visual language for the national dream, appearing in the annual Congress sessions and eventually illustrating the pages of the Constitution itself. Those illustrations don't affect our lives the way the text of the Constitution does, but they lend an emotional and symbolic power to the founding document. When the Constitution was adopted, it was supposed to herald a new beginning, which did away with the worst excesses of our feudal and colonial past. By evoking India's epics and history, however, Bose reminded us that we didn't emerge from a vacuum in 1947. India was not a blank slate, but what Nehru called an ancient palimpsest, whose traditions we would have to embrace, in full, as a guide to our new freedom.
Friend of the Court is an initiative of the Anil Devan Foundation and the School of Legal and Sociopolitical Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Thank you to the guests on this episode, Nasreen Munni-Kabir, Saida Hamid, Ifat Fatima, and Lawrence Liang. This episode was presented by Supriya Nair. It was researched and written by Ramya Boddupalli and Bhavya Dore. Malika Dandekar provided fact-checking and additional research. This episode was recorded at Stitch Audio, Mumbai, and produced by Gaurav Vaz. Sachi Rajithyaksha worked on the sound design, and Ayande mixed and mastered it. Thank you to Sugandha Tatke for editing support. Gauri Diwan, Lawrence Liang, Ranveer Singh, Sham Diwan, and Vivek Diwan advised the show. Special thanks to Justice Gautam Patel, Ashish Rajithyaksha, Reetika Subramanian, Sugandha Yadav, and Vasuman Khandelwal.